Assalamu alaikum and good morning once again. Welcome to the online session. Today's topic is the continuation of scene summary for the diary of Anne Frank, Act 2. In the previous class, we had discussed summaries of the Act 1, which was consist of 5 scenes. So same case here also in Act 2, we would have 5 scenes that we would summarize. Scene 1. In scene 1 we have characters, everyone in the annex, and Miep and Mr. Kraler. The proper names like Miep or Miep, it can be pronounced in either way. So all the characters, and Miep and Mr. Kraler, so these are the characters in scene 1. The setting is obviously the same, the annex on New Year's Day, January 1st, 1944, late afternoon. That was the setting, and mostly the setting is the same place where they took shelter. That's the annex. The conflict in this scene is Peter versus Mr. Dussel. So that was an external conflict over the cat. And the second conflict between Mr. Van Daan and Mrs. Van Daan, that was also external conflict, and that is upon overselling the fur coat. So the conflict, both of them were external conflict, not internal, between people. Now event, there are some events. The event first, Margot is sick and resting. Annie is reading her diary. That was the first event. And you know that Margot is the sister of Annie, elder sister. Event 2, Miep and Mr. Kraler come and Miep baked a cake for them. In event 3, Mr. Dussel teases Peter over Mouschi the cat. So teases mean to make fun of, to disturb someone. And Mouschi is the name of the cat. Event 4, Van Daan's argue and Mr. Kraler says he's sick. So these are the main 4 events in scene 1 of Act 2. The climax. Mr. Kraler tells them about the storeroom worker trying to blackmail them. That was the turning point, the climax. So they have been blackmailed by store worker. What is the resolution? How they resolve? Annie tells us in her diary that the people with the Russian books were arrested and they are very hungry. The invasion is continuing. So invasion means attack. So the attack is continuing. Mr. Kraler has ulcers. Ulcer means skin disease. And the warehouse man might want more money. She lists the things she misses. So the same problem and same resolution, it happens with humans. So the warehouse man, he wanted to raise the money. In scene 2 of Act 2, the characters is Annie, Margot, Mrs. Frank, Peter, and Mrs. Van Daan. So almost all the characters have been repeating time and again, and the setting also has been repeating time and again, but there is or there are differences regarding conflicts and resolution. But mainly the characters and settings, they have been repeating time and again because there wasn't any other setting or place for the setting. The setting is evening in the annex, throughout the annex. Rather, in setting we find a change in the time zone. Sometime morning, sometime afternoon, sometime evening, and sometime night. So in setting there is a difference regarding time zone, the time factor. The conflict, Annie versus Mr. Dussel. So that's the conflict, is external one, and Annie versus Mrs. Frank, both internal and external. And Annie versus Mrs. Van Daan, also internal and external. So it means man versus man, like Annie's and Peter's internal conflict after having feelings for each other. So there is a new dimension being introduced to us, that was Anne's feelings for Peter's and vice versa, or Peter feeling for Annie's. So in event first, Annie and Mr. Dussel are frustrated sharing a room. It's quite common in human nature that they being frustrated or they get bored. So Annie and Mr. Dussel are frustrated sharing a room, but that was a compulsion. In event 2, Mrs. Frank tells Annie to not shut the door on Mr. Dussel. In event 3, Annie and Margot talk about their feelings and people in the annex. These two sisters, they share their feelings regarding people in the annex. In event 4, Annie visits Peter in his room and they talk intimately, closely they talk, because they started liking each other. So obviously she visits Peter in his room and they talk closely. The climax of this scene is that Peter kisses Annie. The resolution, Annie speaks from her diary saying she doesn't think she's in love, but it is nice to have someone. She gives updates on the rat eating their food, the missing cat, Mouschi, the invasion, etc. So Annie confesses that her feelings for Peter is not like lovers feeling for one another, but she needs someone to talk to and share her feelings. So that's why there is a close relation, but not in that sense. In scene 3, we find characters almost same as we discussed earlier, everyone who lives in the annex and later Miep. The settings a few weeks later. Again, there is a dimension of change regarding timing. A few weeks later, in the main room of the annex in the middle of the night. So that is the timing night, few weeks later. That's the difference in the setting. Regarding place, no change. The conflict being the problem, the issue, mains versus main. So the problem is external. Mr. Van Daan versus Mrs. Frank. So all conflicts happens between people when people live at one place together. So there has to be problem, or there have to be problems. In event 1, Mr. Van Daan lights a match and goes to the food safe, taking out a loaf of bread. In event 2, Mrs. Frank sees Mr. Van Daan stealing. In event 3, there is an argument when Mr. Van Daan is confronted. And event 4, Mrs. Frank wants him to leave the annex. So you can find there are also kinds of feelings like hatred sort of feelings, that somebody doesn't like someone. So Mrs. Frank wants him to leave the annex, that Mr. Van Daan. That is a problem. The climax, Miep rings the buzzer and visits them at night unexpectedly. So that servant, that lady, she visited them unexpectedly at night. That was the climax. The resolution, Miep tells them of the invasion, D-Day, and there is some shame among them because of how they have behaved. Annie closes with telling us that the invasion is slowing down. Mr. Kraler is ill. Mr. Dussel still thinks the thief will tell, and everyone is low. Obviously, the invasion, they scare and have fear from the Nazi soldiers because they've been kept in that place, or they took shelter. So all the time they would behave in a very awkward situation. In scene 4, we have character same, everyone living in the secret annex, and setting secret annex. Conflict, main versus self, that was internal, and main versus main, external. So both we have conflicts and problem, main versus main, or main versus self, internal, external, both, over whether to answer the ringing telephone and buzzer. So now someone is ringing a telephone or a buzzer sound, and now they don't know what to do. So event 1, telephone is ringing and ringing. Event 2, no workers have come in on a work day. Event 3, they argue over what to do about the phone ringing. Nobody could dare to receive because there is a fear. Event 4, Annie and Peter share their thoughts and feelings. Climax, 2 cars screech to a stop in front of the annex and they wait, the buzzer starts. Now they heard something from outside, like screeching car. Resolution, Annie writes goodbye in her diary and asks it be kept safe. She closes with I hope. In scene 5, we find these characters, Miep, Mr. Kraler and Mr. Frank. The setting 3 years now, 3 years past. 3 years following their capture in the annex. It's 1945. End of the war. World War II, the end of the World War II. The conflict, main versus self, internal conflict, struggling with emotion and memories. Now we have event 1. Mr. Frank comes back to the annex and talks with Miep and Mr. Kraler about all that happened. Now these events happen later on when the war finished and concentration camps and many people been died. So in the first event, Mr. Frank comes back to the annex and talks with me and Mr. Kraler about all that happened. So event 2, Miep and Mr. Kraler tell what happened on the day the Nazis police came to the annex. In event 3, Mr. Frank retells what had happened to them after that. So they sort of sharing their memories and their thoughts, what happened, who is where. Climax, he tells them and us, obviously being readers, he tells them and us, Annie, I know now, Annie is dead. So that is the climax, that Annie is dead. What is the resolution? Mr. Frank reads the diary, quotes Annie. We hear Annie telling us that, I quote, people are really good at her. Mr. Frank is touched by this, and so are we, the readers. Annie's diary lives on and carries her story to people. The diary was a hiding place for Annie while she hid. The diary is a symbol of Annex, and Annie is a symbol of good lives lost for nothing. Homework. Dear student, study the text of the diary of Annie Frank from the beginning to the end while pondering upon the scene-wise summaries in order to reflect the real-life picture being presented to us. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.